Welcome back to the channel and thank you for watching. With so many people going around committing criminal damage, in my view, in support of Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion and so on and so forth, lots of people have asked me whether it's possible, whether it's legal for you as a citizen to arrest said person if you believe that they are committing a criminal offence. So I thought I'd do another video to briefly explain again citizens arrest. Now, by no means is this video encouraging you to go out and start arresting people that are doing this. It's entirely your own choice, and if you were to do that, you would obviously face any consequences if there were any consequences, which I will explain at the end of the video, so make sure you keep watching. And of course, you would need to take formal legal advice, because this is not, and this cannot be taken as formal legal advice. But first of all, if you're new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law. And as a very brief note to my keyboard warriors for the previous video, when I say the video isn't sponsored, it really isn't sponsored. If I recommend a service to you, it's because I'm recommending a service to you. If I tell you that the video is sponsored, then the video is sponsored, but I would generally only take a sponsorship from someone that I genuinely recommend. Also, if you're interested in learning the law, this is probably the best book that you can go out and get, because learning the law, it tells you exactly the process of going to get a degree, what paths you can take, whether you go down the academic route, the practice route, and so on. The affiliate link for that is also in the description below, just for the keyboard warriors that complain that I take sponsorships. So, hey ho, on with the video. So, if you are out in a supermarket and you see somebody who is, let's say, pouring milk all over the floor, let's say smashing bottles up or throwing things around, or in any other sense damaging a product which you reasonably believe amounts to criminal damage. Now, most people would probably not get involved with this, but some of you I know do want to get involved, because this sounds like it's going to be more and more prevalent as the weeks and months go by, because these protests are sort of getting out of control. So, this is the brief overview that I promised. Section 24A of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984 creates a provision for arrest without a warrant for other persons. That means you, other than a constable, because it says a person other than a constable may arrest without a warrant. Firstly, A, anyone who is in the act of committing an indictable offence. B, anyone whom he has reasonable grounds for suspecting to be committing an indictable offence. So if you happen upon somebody who is in the act of committing, or you have reasonable grounds for suspecting that they are committing an indictable offence. In other words, you've got reasonable grounds. This is the section of the act that is relevant. Subsection 2 is the alternative, where it has been committed, providing that where an indictable offence has been committed, a person other than a constable may arrest without a warrant anyone who is guilty of the offence, or anyone that you have reasonable grounds to suspect to be guilty of the offence. Bearing in mind at all times subsection 3, because this is a power of summary arrest. It's a power of arrest bestowed upon citizens, but only exercisable if, in the following circumstances, the person making the arrest has reasonable grounds for believing that the reasons mentioned in subsection 4, which I'll come to in a moment, that it is necessary to arrest the person in question, and that it appears that it's not reasonable or practicable for a constable, a police officer, to do that instead. So, those provisions referred to in subsection 4 include section A, to prevent the person from causing physical injury to himself or any other person. B, from suffering any physical injury. C, causing loss of or damage to property, where someone is, let's say, pouring milk over something, or about to throw soup or whatever it might be over a painting. If you believe that they are committing that offence, or you have reasonable grounds to believe that they are committing that offence, and it's not practicable for a police officer to do so, but it's necessary for you to do that to prevent that person from causing loss or damage to property, that's when this power of arrest applies. But also my personal favourite, subsection D, which is to prevent that person from making off before a constable can assume responsibility for him. This is one where I have personally exercised that power of arrest when I've told this story before. Long story short, somebody was walking between me and another lady. This person tried to rob the lady next to me, grabbed her handbag, tried to run off. Using my martial arts skills, I reacted, got this person, got him down to the floor with reasonable force, which I'll come back to in just a moment, and detained him until a police officer was there, because that was obviously an indictable offence, because it's robbery, and it was obviously necessary to do that to prevent loss to the lady in the sense of her bag and all of its contents, and under sub D, prevent him from making off before the police officer could come and assume responsibility for him. Now, criminal damage is an indictable offence because it's an either way offence. It can be heard in the Crown Court. However, there is a huge caveat to all this in that criminal damage that does not exceed £5,000 and does not involve the use of fire, which would be arson, and does not involve damaging a memorial, which I'll come back to in a moment. If the criminal damage is under £5,000, it is triable summarily only. So this means, for example, if someone is simply pouring a bottle of milk all over the floor, criminal damage will not be the justification for a citizen's arrest because the value is going to be under £5,000. However, if they were setting fire to something, regardless of the value being under £5,000, that would make it indictable. So then a citizen's arrest can be used for that. On the other hand, where the offence is destroying or damaging a memorial, which has its own definition, then that is indictable as well. So you have to be very careful if you're relying on the criminal damage argument when carrying out a citizen's arrest. Although, as I said, it's not really referred to as a citizen's arrest. It is simply a power of arrest. But the exception to all this, of course, is low-value shoplifting, which is under £200. Now, although this is ordinarily triable only summarily, this is still one where the defendant can elect a Crown Court trial because it's an offence of dishonesty. Now, I've made arguments before that someone who is destroying property or treating it as though they are the owner of the property could amount to theft. So if you reasonably believed that this was theft, then that might justify a citizen's arrest for what would otherwise be low-value shoplifting or treating something as the owner. But again, that's a nuanced argument, and certainly not one that I would recommend you trying to argue in court, because it's mostly going to be chalked up to criminal damage, which is under £5,000. Although, obviously, if the amount goes over £5,000, as in the painting incident, where you'd have a reasonable ground for believing that it's over £5,000 worth, it was in the tens of millions, that is, of course, much more likely to satisfy an arrest in those situations, because it would be criminal damage that would, in your view, at that time, easily exceed £5,000. Although, as it transpires, I believe only the frame was damaged and the painting itself wasn't damaged, so the argument in court was that it was definitively under £5,000. But you would have the reasonable belief that they were committing an offence which was in excess of £5,000, so you probably would have been okay. Now, what about the use of force, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's an important point. Now, this is provided for by the Criminal Law Act of 1967, specifically Section 3, which is the use of force in making an arrest. This doesn't limit it to a police constable. This simply says use of force in making an arrest. A person may use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in the prevention of crime, or in the effecting or assisting in the lawful arrest of offenders or suspected offenders or persons unlawfully at large. And this also replaces some of the rules under common law. So reasonable force, the use of force as is reasonable. In other words, if you start hitting this person in order to stop them doing what they're doing, that's not reasonable force. Reasonable force, you have to think of what is your objective. If your objective is to prevent the person from causing damage, and your objective is to detain the person and prevent them from making off until a constable arrives, then you could use such physical force as is reasonable to prevent them from running away. That could be you and or another person or persons holding on to this offender or suspected offender to prevent them from running off. But this is where some people might get into a bit of trouble, because if you use more force than is reasonable in those circumstances, then you may be charged with assault yourself. However, it's probably safer not to do it by yourself. B, probably safer if there are police there or they can get there to allow them to do it instead. But if you are in that position and there is going to be serious damage or loss of property or injury to the person or to other persons, or you really want to prevent them from making off before a constable can assume responsibility for them, then reasonable force would just be that which is no more than is necessary to achieve that objective, which would be to prevent them from damaging the property, prevent them from hurting themselves or others, and or to prevent them from making off before a constable can assume responsibility for them. Now, just to reiterate, as I said at the beginning, this video is not in any way intended to encourage everybody to go out and start making citizens arrests of your own, but I've had the question so many times in the comments that I thought I would produce this once again as guidance, not as legal advice, as guidance as to which sections of statutes apply in you deciding whether or not to make a citizen's arrest. So it is a power of arrest. It is a citizen's power of arrest, which is provided for very narrowly. So be careful with it. It is a power, but it applies very narrowly. It must be an indictable offence, which is one that can be heard on an indictment. And it must be where a police officer cannot assume responsibility for them, and it must be for one of those reasons made out in subsection 4 that I've just explained. But overall, if nothing else, I hope this video has highlighted to you that this is fraught with difficulty, so I would certainly not be rushing out there to arrest anybody because they're pouring milk on the floor, because I think you're going to really struggle to justify a citizen's arrest in those situations, and simply you should call the police. So as I said, this video is not to encourage you to go out and arrest anybody in these cases, but if you wanted to do so, you need to bear these things in mind. If it's criminal damage under £5,000, it's triable only summarily and thus not an indictable offence, unless of course it involves the use of fire, which is arson, or it involves a memorial as per the definitions, or the aggregate amount of each separate criminal damage would exceed £5,000, even if individually they would be under £5,000. Clear as mud, probably, which is probably why you should steer clear of it. But anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Please hit the like button and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.